Greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion, as you can tell from the title up there. Another review series starting. This time is for a series that within the last year finally made its long-awaited debut. It is the Amazon Prime show that was created by VisiPop and produced by Amazon in conjunction with A24. This, of course, is Hazbin Hotel. Now, unlike most of the time when I do a show series review, there's not going to be a separate overview and all that. I'm just going to combine it in with the pilot episode one, because some of my overview thoughts kind of go in with the pilot, in with the show proper. Like a lot of recent shows, this was introduced to me via my good friend Jeff, but unlike those ones where it was a direct recommendation, it was more by osmosis and being close to him, plus, like with Demon Slayer and My Hero, also for me noticing stuff at conventions. And that, of course, like always, is the cosplayers. Now, unlike with those two, it was more noticing there was cosplayers and not really hearing a lot about the show in general, other than loosely the pilot. Now, I had only seen like a couple clips from it, but that was after randomly hearing one of the songs from the pilot in Jeff's playlist. And of course, that's the character Charlie's song, "Inside Every Demon There's a Rainbow," which, hearing it, I'm like, this is an interesting song concept. But then it got put to the back of my mind until, both through Jeff and through TikTok, I was introduced to its spin-off, Hell of a Boss. And while it took me a while to actually watch that entire show proper, I mean, I only really watched every episode in order last year. It was just like random bits and all that, but I still became a fan. And then I found out the whole spin-off thing, and I was always curious, like, how do you get a spin-off before the first show is even done? Usually it's the other way. And of course I found out that in the writing process originally for this show, VisiPop had conceived of the side characters that became IMP for Hell of a Boss, but then realized that the whole thing with theirs would not fit with the tone of Has Been a Hotel. Which it's definitely true. It would have made interesting for like some episodes, but it would have been too distracting. So it being in the same universe but a separate show makes a little bit more sense. And of course allows them to build on the lore. The only downside is, whereas Hell of a Boss is still 100% independently produced, Hazbin is produced by Amazon and A24, and because of the whole thing with how copyright works, even though they're both created by VisiPop, it's hard to do crossovers. And as the latest episode of Hell of a Boss has shown, at least at the time I'm recording this, in case you're wondering, it's the one where Satan first appears. It means that some parts of the crossover that would be needed are not going to be able to be happen other than like loose references. And of course, it also allows a lot of the fandom to debate where in the timeline each parts of the stuff is happening at. Now, I did watch the show proper when it came out, but I had not watched the pilot. I didn't watch the pilot until after it had done. And I gotta say that the pilot didn't really stick with me as much the first time I watched it. Watching it and be like, okay, I can see why fans, when this dropped back in October 2019, loved it, and why they were clamoring for it, and then really were loving the spinoff and all that. It just didn't click with me as much. Watching it the second time, maybe it's I'm in a better mindset, maybe better time of day watching it, but it did click with me a bit more, especially the humor. So I could see why fans loved it, and I can understand a little bit more why some fans are disappointed on it, how the final show turned out. It's just some of what I've been seeing from the fandom in various places, I just have myself scratching my head and going, huh? Now, part of that is seeing some people in the comment sections on YouTube, TikTok, even on Reddit, saying stuff. And another one is from one of my photographers, I'm not going to mention name here, always commenting on it. And I even asked him one time in the comment section, how did Amazon ruin the show? That's his whole thing. Amazon ruined the show. And there's never really any follow-up whenever I see him post that, which is why I asked him, how did Amazon ruin the show? And I added in the question stuff that is common in the entertainment industry when it comes to a show. Now, part of that is coming from the fact that this original episode is a pilot episode. For those of you who don't know what a pilot episode is, it is the proof of concept when it comes to on film of how the creator envisions the show going. And borrow from Tarantino, the backers look at that, and from the pilot they decide whether they want to make more shows. Ones that are picked up go off, become television programs, or in modern time, streaming programs, whereas the other ones, they just go off into the void, could become forgotten media. Now, with that, there are times where not everything that is in the pilot carries over, because there will be times where they look at it and go, okay, some of this stuff is good, we got to change some of it. Some of that can come from the producer, some of that can come from the creator, and it could be a little bit of both. It's a process that is both sides. Now there could be times where the producers are the ones that say it all and the other ones like, eh. But it's give and take. And it's one of those things that, like, unless you have proof either way, just yelling that one side ruined it like that is like, yeah, that's a little weird. And even if it is the case, I don't really see VisiPop coming out and actually saying that, at least right now while the show is airing, because that would kind of ruin the whole momentum the show has. If that is the case, it's probably not going to leak until way later after the show's gone off, but get back on track. It is part of the creative process when it comes to a show like that. Sometimes the changes from the pilot to the final show are going to be minor, just like little tweaks here, like, okay, we just used borrowed set. Then some of this is going to be more applicable to sitcoms, like, yeah, we're going to change the set around a little bit, change the makeup and the lighting style a little bit, make it seem a little bit more contemporary as opposed to more classic how it looks. Sometimes a character gets dropped, like I mentioned in my Raymond review series. Leo went off into the void, sharing a room with the Frito Bandito, amongst other forgotten characters. Or as my buddy Blinky said, the land of forgotten mascots. He fit right in. Now sometimes, when they drop the characters, it's that they never air entirely. That's what happened with the original pilot for Gilligan's Island. A couple of the characters that were originally going to be on the island were dropped entirely. They created some new characters. If I remember right, that was Professor and Marianne. And then they created a whole new first episode out of what they could salvage. Now, in that case, the pilot proper did not air. In a case where it's only like minor stuff that's dropped, the pilot will air as the first episode. It's going to depend on the type of series. For Hell of a Boss, the pilot episode technically aired in order to gauge interest, but it's technically no longer considered canon. From what I gather, Hazbin is still considered canon until a future time where VisiPop says it's not canon, but the following events did happen in canon. Be one of those things. But when we jump from this pilot to the series proper, most of the changes in the grand scheme of things are relatively minor. It's mainly the animation style changes, which, as a side thing, one of the complaints I see even now, because I actually saw it in the comment section of the pilot when I watched it today, people saying that the animation in the final show is bad. It's like, it's not bad, it's just a different style. Different and bad are not synonymous. It's just that the older animation style in the pilot is reminiscent of the old school animation from like the 30s into the 40s, like that old school, very rubbery and, for lack of a better term, animated style that like Looney Tunes and classic cartoons of that era did. Whereas the final show, it's a more rigid and more traditional modern animation style. They both have their places. It's just, obviously someone's going to have a preference for one or the other. Me, the only thing is that like characters like Charlie kind of lose a little bit more of that flexibility of the animation. It's not as exaggerated, but it's not a deal breaker for me. And of course, the changing of the cast. We totally lose the entire cast, which for some of them it's not really that big a deal. Like with in the pilot we got Crystal Laporte as Cherry Bomb, we got Michelle Marie as Nifty. I mean, we can see what they're doing with the character, but they don't really have a lot to work with. I mean, of those two I just mentioned, Crystal has a lot more to do than Michelle does, but it's one of those things, all they do is establish how the character sounds, and there's not really a lot. I think, especially with Michelle as Nifty. Nifty is not really established that much of a character here, other than her role within the hotel hierarchy. The other ones, like voice of Charlie, then we got Michael Kovac as Angel Dust. We got Monica Franco as Vaggie. And of course, Edward Bosco is Alistair. They really establish how the character sounds and the behavior with the script. There's like, I can see why fans, especially if they're fans of that person's voice acting career, why they're saddened that they got replaced in from the pilot to the final show. Now, outside of replacing a character wholesale, that's not as common when it comes to pilots, and of course I'm thinking mainly from a sitcom standpoint with that, but also with like a drama show and all that. Most of the time when something like that happens, it's usually they'll replace the character wholesale, or if they replace the actor, it's usually later on in a show's run, and it's usually due to behind-the-scenes issues. And just I'm thinking of a certain 90s sitcom when I say that, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Or they decide to leave the show entirely because of other personal behind-the-scenes reasons, and I'm thinking of The Munsters when I say that. And then, of course, there could be other reasons why they don't bring the person back, and that I'm thinking of Pike in Star Trek when it comes to that, and I'm thinking like OTS Pike when they actually brought in parts of the menagerie into the canon there. But to lambast Vizzy Pop and say she was forced to change it, there could be the case she might have been forced to change it, but it could also have been that she hired these people with the intention of maybe keeping them on, see if they worked, or maybe getting bigger name voice actors after the fact. It's one of those things behind the scenes. She might have. There's a possibility she could have mentioned it at that panel, but from the video I've seen of them talking about it, I haven't seen anything yet. But then again, that strikes me as something that you're not going to come out and say while the show is airing because you don't want to hurt the show. So if she was forced to, and that does come to light, I will admit it, yeah. But I will also say it's like, doesn't really hurt the following show for me, especially with the characters that didn't really have a lot. The only one of the ones that I mentioned so far that'll be like, yeah, we kind of lost a little bit of something is with Alistair. And that's mainly because he seems a little bit more of a balanced, dark, humorous character in the pilot. But that also could be with what the story of the pilot is. How it's setting what the status quo is going to be, introducing the characters, the general concept. And of course, especially since this is also setting up the general concept of hell in this universe, that we can afford to show that side of him a little bit more, whereas in the final show there's only like a couple moments where it can go into. I'll definitely say that his, Edward's transatlantic accent allows for a little bit more of the old school comedic timing stuff, whereas the one in the final show, which that would be, I'm looking at my notes right here, for Amir's. Yeah, it's a little bit more rigid there, but it's still fun. And of course the humor. I mean, YouTube has guidelines, Amazon has guidelines, so it's going to be balanced there. It's just you can have a little bit more of it in the pilot because it's setting the show up. And plus you got a longer runtime in a pilot for 30 minutes versus, I think the episodes are like 15 to 20, so more standard time, so of course it's going to be that. Oh yeah, I forgot to make Lauer as Husk. I mean, he does a decent job, but then again, it's kind of hard to fight against the person who ends up replacing him, which I'll talk about in the next episode. Now, another thing, I think some parts of the fandom of the pilot probably are letting skew him a little bit is the fact that Amazon is involved. And I know there's a whole thing against Amazon, its CEO, you know, the whole eat the rich thing. And I think at times letting that skew your view on how the final show is can be dangerous. I mean, I have issues with Netflix and some of the policy stuff they're doing, but the original shows they still make that I like, I'm still going to say I like them. Like, I liked Blue Eyed Samurai. I haven't watched the last couple seasons of it, but I did like Stranger Things, although I'll say as a whole the first season definitely stronger. I've only seen bits and pieces of some of the other shows, like the ones that my grandmother used to watch, but they looked interesting. It's a shame that they would only do like a handful of seasons and then cancel them for no reason. But with Amazon, it's like they create shows and all that. I mean, I get not liking the CEO, but put that at the door when it comes to the show proper. Unless it's something that's canceled prematurely and then you find out it's because of budget reasons and all that. Then you can attack the CEO. But I just find it interesting that two other shows I've been watching this year from Amazon Prime haven't been getting as lambasted as much as Hazbin has when it comes to possible changes like that. One, of course, being Fallout. I mean, I've seen people arguing in comment sections, but it's mainly been about how this show is affecting like the endings from the games and like which one's going to be considered canon when looking at it through the show's eyes, especially with season 2 and specifically New Vegas and maybe 3, maybe 4, and of course the other one being Invincible. But that one I've seen a little bit more some arguments about it, but that's mainly been how it's adapted its original source material. But of course that one, there's only a finite way you can go at it. I mean, maybe not liking some of the changes, but at the end of the day, it's one of those things that you can't say they're wrong for it, considering the original creator is involved in the adaptation process. So it's like, if you have an issue, you got to take it up with the original creator. It's like when the author of a novel is the one that writes the screenplay, and he makes changes from book to screen. I mean, you can have issue with it personally, but you can't really say it's wrong when they're the one doing it. Well, technically you could say they're wrong, but it's one of those ones that, like, for me, it's going to be like, yeah, not an argument, it's holding water. Here, get back on my point, I think that you need to temper the hate of Amazon a little bit when it comes to how you're looking at the show. Then again, when it's from that part of the fandom, this is one aspect of fandoms that is not really my favorite. Part of the reason I borrowed a phrase from Clerks 1 and just adjusted the wording. This fandom would be great if it wasn't for the fucking fans. And it's true. I mean, I've seen it with plenty of fandoms. I mean, one that comes to mind, which is still having content made today, is a good example. Star Wars. I'm not going to get into the full tangent on that, but this applies more for than just Disney's Star Wars. Which, even though I have some issues here and there with Disney Star Wars as a whole, I don't mind how they've handled it. It's just most of my issues probably stem with how they treated the numbered sequels, and then of course from that, them wholesale getting rid of the old legends, when I think they should have just kept everything prequel, and then maybe pick and choose after episode 6 what they wanted to keep. But at least now they're doing a little bit better job with how they're picking and choosing it. My issue is more like how some of the fandom was toward Lucas and a lot of the other people when he made the prequels. I mean, the prequels aren't perfect. I mean, there's issues you can take with how the films were made and all that fun stuff. But it's more like how they lambasted some of the actors for stuff. I mean, certain Anakin actor really feeling like he was being picked on and all that, and then a certain Gungan actor being close to suicide because of how the backlash was, amongst other stuff. I mean, there's a bunch of other stuff in the Star Wars fandom you can pick up, but those are my main ones, where it's, you gotta temper some of that. And I'm not saying that not everyone that likes the show is coming at it from that angle, but you gotta admit there is a little possibility that some of it is from that part of the fandom. And when it comes to that part of the fandom, I usually just ignore that part of the fandom. It's one of those things that, like, when they flare up, it's like, go back to the hole you crawled out of. It's like, toxic fans are the killer of any fandom. That's all I'm gonna say on that. It's one of the things I had to bring up for this. So it's one of those things that temper Amazon hate, temper any like toxic fandom things you can have. Look at it a little bit more open-mindedly, and it's not that bad. Nah, no, with the little change stuff. That being said, going on to my thoughts as the pilot as a whole entirely, like I said earlier, I do enjoy it. The animation definitely helps in that regard there. I mean, a little bit more animated at points. I mean, exaggerated probably a better term to use than animated. Sets up the concept perfectly. I mean, there's some parts of it where it's kind of hard to ignore what they're setting up, having watched the show already, but it's nice to see that, like, the idea's there. Like the opening crawl, you definitely get the little hints towards Lucifer and Lilith. I do like it. Shows the aftermath of one of the exterminations, and then shows, 365 days till next one. And we see that Charlie really does not like these exterminations. And you see that she really is a bleeding heart, and she wants to change things for the better. And while the show, and this goes for the whole thing, doesn't really address like any real life religion specifically, outside of how it draws from the Abrahamic religions for some of its mythology, part of what Charlie is trying to do with hotel, and that is to rehabilitate sinners and send them up to heaven, her ultimate goal, which is laughed at by everybody in hell, basically, which that's the lead up of her first musical number where she's on live TV in hell. She's trying to speak, but she's not getting anywhere normally, so she does a big musical number, which afterwards everyone laughs at. I do enjoy the musical number, and I love the lead-in where Vaggie is like, do not sing, and then when she sees it, she's like, no, no, no. And thanks to Razzle and Dazzle, Charlie gets it. But to go in, her whole thing that everyone is scoffing at, that the only person who seems to believe in it is Vaggie. Some will say that doesn't really align that much with Judeo-Christian Islamic values, but it aligns a little bit with something my late abuela mentioned to me one time when I don't remember what the lead-in was. We were talking about religion, because just go off a little side note here. I never really brought up my own religious beliefs. Nowadays, I consider myself an agnostic, even though at one point I was a deist, and before that, like non-denominational Christian, and then mostly raised Catholic, which is what my abuela was. She, I should say, probably like middle of the road, because some ways she was more traditional, like when it comes to gay marriage, and other ways a little bit more open-minded. That's why I say middle of the road. And this one strikes me more as an open-minded belief when it comes to dogma, and that is what happens to sinners when they die. The only absolute one that she mentioned was that she felt that if you killed somebody and there was no justification of it, no self-defense, no trying to protect the innocent, not at war, within reason, you go straight to hell and you don't burn that off. But if it's like a more minor sin, something you'd be sent to hell for, you'll burn it off. And after a certain amount of time, you might be able to go to heaven. That strikes me more as being sent to like purgatory or something than it does to hell proper, but that concept does align a little bit with what Charlie's trying to do here. So I could see, in theory, from a religious standpoint, it working. It's just that the soul in question would have to put in the work here to try to better themselves. Which is the issue, because they're in hell. That is still a line from the Blitzo says in Hell Boss, everyone's shitty, hello, we're in hell! And it's one of those things that they have to want to better themselves. I mean, the one person that Charlie has at the hotel is only there for free room and board. He's not actively trying to better himself, which is what makes Charlie's whole thing on the news blow up in her face. When the news cuts to Angel Dust helping his buddy Cherry Bomb fight a turf war with Serpentius, which he's kind of the breakout character if you think about it when it comes to the show proper, because here in the pilot, it makes it seem like he's like a background character that could turn into a real one. It could go either way. But just looking at how he was portrayed in the pilot, he seems more like he could be like a background character, maybe a recurring character, but not like what he became. But that's because he's more the butt of a couple jokes here. Especially the end where he attacks, and even though he knows Alistair, Alistair's like, who are you? Which I'm glad they continue that joke in the show proper, and that was a good joke to continue. But it just blows up in her face. But Alistair, the radio demon, having heard the broadcast, or as he calls it, on the picture show, he decides to come in and help Charlie with it. Now, while he does not believe in her dream, in fact, he says he's only doing it for the lulz, the fact that he's still trying to help her do it shows a little bit of something. Now, of course, he's probably just doing it for the major lulz to see how easily it blows up in her face. It is still a good act that he's trying to do it. Now, he's not doing it altruistically based on his own comments, so far as we can see. And what we see in the show proper and what some of the leaks for Season 2 have implied, yeah, it's probably not going to be altruistically in the end either. But the fact that he's just doing it is enough to allow Charlie to have him help, even though Vaggie does not trust him one bit. Still a line from the Grinch, she wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole, and if it was up to her, he would not be helping with the hotel, but it's not. And I just love the whole little joke of how she never trusts him, and that kind of goes in reverse as well. But it also could be Alistair doing it for the lulz, you know. Poke her with a stick, see if she moves. With a 10-foot pole. And of course they continue that into the show proper, which is good. Like I said, stuff it sets up. Like proof of concept. Set up what's going to go happen. Status quo. And Alistair's his second musical number, which is a take on Charlie's, also helps set up the whole thing. Him bringing in the characters that are going to help with the hotel, like Nifty being the maid, Husk being the front desk guy / bartender. And of course, all the characters who were living in the hotel, so it sets up the basic premise, like what a pilot's supposed to do. And there's not really much else to say about that. I mean, like I said, every concept of it, the beginning lore is set up, including, like I mentioned, Charlie's dad not really believing in her dream. It looks like he's being a little absentee. Her mother not being there. Why, we don't know. I mean, they don't even name her in the show proper, at least that I caught this time, but we know it's Lilith, which, if you don't know, you're Judaism, Adam's first wife, which that's one thing that the show's lore does not bring in until the show proper, so some fans not liking that I can get. But it's one of those things like, yeah, it makes sense they're going to bring in more characters from the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition. I mean, with things. I mean, I don't really see them ever bringing in Jesus or any other figures like that in there, but I would have no issue with it, because there's going to be one moment when we get to a certain episode in the show proper where I'm going to be like, this would have been a time for Jesus to come in and throw this table over. But those of you who watch the show probably know what I'm talking about. Now, there's only a couple little bits of trivia that I put here, and that is that this pilot reached over 1 million views in under 24 hours, which that right there shows, okay, we're greenlighting this and search for funding. And apparently at one point there was going to be a Nazi joke in the draft somewhere, but then Busy Pop said they cut it because they didn't want to go there. Which, anyone saying that the show proper loses its edge, it's like, yeah, and that right there shows it's probably a self-done edge. I mean, sometimes you can make stuff funny by going there, but then sometimes being a little bit more creative because of restrictions, even if they're self-imposed, can make you think of stuff that's funnier. Or can make your creative juices flow a little bit more. I mean, sometimes it can be technological, like we've seen with films pre-CGI, and sometimes it's you have to think of ways to address stuff without addressing it by its proper name. We see that with sitcoms a lot. Like a certain Raymond episode. We got things. And then watching it proper, I have a feeling the Nazi joke probably would have been in the musical number somewhere. But considering they're in hell, there's plenty of places where they could have put a Nazi joke. But it's like, yeah, you're not going there for here. That fits more of the tone of Hell of a Boss anyway than it does this. Although I could see Charlie trying to rehabilitate even the worst Nazi person. Like her trying to rehabilitate Mengele or even Hitler would be interesting. But yeah, I not going there probably for the best. Go with non-real life people when it comes to that. You know, outside of, the tradition you guys are drawn from for your base lore. On the whole, the pilot, entertaining, nice way to set up everything. Definitely a pilot on Amazon you guys, on YouTube you guys should watch. If you've only watched the show proper, I say you go back and rewatch it. If you've only watched the pilot and you're tentative about watching the follow-up show based on what you've heard, I'd say just go in it open-minded. If you don't like it still, hey. And just as an aside, those who don't like the show, I'd love to hear why in the comment section. I mean, obviously, if it's something I've already mentioned in this video, obviously I'm going to disagree with you, but I'd love to hear you explain it a bit more. And of course, if you feel that, like, my one photographer Amazon ruined the show, explain why. Because I would love to hear, like, an actual setup reason and not just go, oh yeah, they ruined the show. It's just Amazon. The type of thing. Now, what the? I didn't ask for a Husk cameo, did you? No, I didn't ask for Husk. But get back on this, freaking cats. We have to. That's really all that has to say about the pilot. Now, next time we're going to be going with episode 1 of the show proper. There's going to be some thoughts in there, of course, about the switch over with the voice actors, like how they interpret the character versus the pilot one. Of course, my thought on the pilot, and also the musical numbers. Because if there's one thing I don't think I've made clear, I am a fan of musicals. So this show is right up my alley when it comes to that. And of course, the lore that is expanded on, starting with episode 1 and how it just keeps going forward. But of course, that's going to be for next time. Till then, everybody.